I'm Frank Vaughn. It is February 10th, 2025, and I just want to start today's edition with a short public service announcement. I have a policy, as many of you know from watching to the end of the videos, that I don't acknowledge individual donors in any specific way because I'm not running a pay-for-access junket here. Everybody gets my work at the same low price, free. That way everybody can access it. But if you want to see it blossom and continue, I do have a donate link that you can use. Now, I'm breaking with that policy only slightly here because I'm not acknowledging the donor, but I am including the message they sent. I'm broke, but enjoy your stuff, Frank. If you're in financial straits, don't send me money. I want to make sure that you're okay. The reason I provide this for free is so that everybody has access to it. No paywalls, no Patreon, no special access, because the information is more important than anything else. I may not be cash rich, but I do appreciate everybody that participates by supporting it. But if you're broke, don't feel obliged. I'm letting you know it's okay. That's why I do things the way I do. And with that out of the way, let us proceed to continuing to build the case as to why Canada is a weak country, why Canada is not a real country, and why Canada is a legitimate security threat to the United States. If that sounds extreme, because that's the first time you've heard those words and you haven't watched my previous video work, please go watch the last couple of weeks' worth of videos. I spell out very clear with all the receipts why it is that Canada is a high priority threat to the United States. With that in mind, let's listen.
You announced tariffs on Canada and Mexico. You immediately got action from both of them on border security. And
I rarely pause in the middle of listening to something, but Trump didn't get action. What Trump got was a promise of action. So I'm going to disagree with that.
Drug interdiction.
I did. A lot of action that nobody expected.
Is that good enough?
No, it's not good enough.
So more needed in 30 days.
Something has to happen. It's not sustainable. And I'm changing it.
You know, the Prime Minister said this weekend to a group of Canadian businessmen, he was at a private meeting, he said that your wish for Canada to be the 51st state is a, quote, real thing. Is it a real thing?
Yeah, it is. I think Canada would be much better off being a 51st state because we lose $200 billion a year with Canada, and I'm not going to let that happen. It's too much. Why are we paying $200 billion a year, essentially in subsidy to Canada? Now, if they're a 51st state, I don't mind doing it.
At the risk of reiteration, I want you to keep in mind as we listen to these clips that they are in addition to the things the president has said, the executive orders that he has signed. This is building on the case for why Canada is an American problem. Now, this clip is just going to give you an idea of the mentality of the Americans right now. Whether you like it or not, this is where we are.
Years ago, Gulf of America, Canada, Greenland, Gaza, all these are very muscular foreign policy. How does this align with America first?
Because it makes us bigger, stronger, and better, and more protective. We need Greenland because of national security, international security, world peace. And we'll have to do that. Canada, we'll see what happens with Canada, but the people of Canada would be paying less than half of the tax. If you look at the tax, they're going to be paying less than half the tax. They don't pay very much for military, and the reason they don't pay much is they assume that we're going to protect them.
Earlier on in this clip, Trump signed a proclamation recognizing the Gulf of America, the renaming of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. You need to understand as we proceed into the future that this is the new Monroe Doctrine. If you don't know what that is, look up James Monroe. Maybe I should make a video about it. I don't know where I'd find time. But this is a focus, a refocusing of America's efforts and attention on the hemisphere. The previous administration and America as it has been designed over the last 40 years was increasingly international, was increasingly guided by the UN, was increasingly guided by Davos and Europe and the wills of those people, undermined by this diversity, equity, and inclusivity nonsense, undermined by the gender unicorn and the way it bends sanity. That is all over with. America's not interested in the global empire aspect of its existence. They are more focused on trying to build Fortress North America and a protection racket around Fortress North America, accepting that we now live in a multipolar world. Now, why is Canada such a threat? I've explained in detail in previous videos how we have become a drug running and money laundering capital to the world. Trump keeps talking about $200 billion. It is suspiciously close to what I have estimated the worth of our criminal enterprises actually is, both domestically and in terms of the export market. We export drugs to the world. We money launder for the world. We're taking money in from the world, funneling it into our real estate system, and thus rinsing it clean. That's why you can't afford a house. It is illegal drug money. Go watch my previous videos. This is an existential threat to the United States because a lot of this leads back to the Communist Party of China, who, as much as they want to do business with the Western world, as much as they want to do business with the United States, they're more than happy to undermine their strategic enemies, which is what they've been doing. They've been funding the DEI initiatives. They've bought out your universities. In Canada, they're operating police stations on our soil. They're harassing our citizens. They have ensured that the ports remain open for the raw ingredients that go into the drug trade. China dominates our mineral industry. China has a huge share in our oil wealth, and they use Canada. And along with their allies at the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, they have used us to undermine the United States through our porous borders and our policies. That is not going to happen moving forward into the future. The headline over at CTV News, right below Trump says he will slap tariffs on Canada's steel and aluminum today, which is a misnomer. Like, I have an issue with that headline right there because it's designed to target Trump. The tariffs are on all steel and aluminum coming into the United States. It'll affect us disproportionately, but it is a global-wide tariff. It is a tariff on all of those products coming into the United States, but I digress. Poilievre says the Conservatives would build a permanent military base in Iqaluit. This is window dressing. It is too late for this kind of signaling. Now, listen, I've said I'm going to vote for the Conservative Party of Canada, and I will. They haven't done anything to make me want to stay home yet. If they were to get into office, my life will improve just by them committing to putting domestic criminals and drug dealers in jail. The Liberals and the NDP won't do that. But there's a very real scenario where Pierre Poilievre never becomes Prime Minister, simply by merit of Mark Carney becomes leader of the Liberal Party. The NDP look at their poll numbers and they understand that they're not even going to win a seat. They're going to be completely wiped out. So what they've got today is all they've got. And they support Mark Carney, who doesn't even hold a seat. You never voted for him. As Prime Minister, there's an emergency act invoked. They push the election out to 26 and maybe even beyond. Because you need to understand, Canada, your Charter of Rights and Freedoms can be suspended at the government's whim. They do whatever they want. In the United States, sovereignty is spread out amongst the citizens. Every single one of them has a little tiny piece, and they have a lot more power than you do. The only power you have is to mark an X. You can't demand accountability for the people you send to Ottawa, and they can do whatever they want to you. The fact that we have a king is symbolic because you're virtually serfs to the whims of Parliament. The elected Parliament, as well as the Senate, which is appointed until they're 75, virtually for life, the judiciary, which you have no power over, you are virtual slaves in Canada. Now, you might think that's an extreme statement. It's actually not. Look at my previous video work. Examine the facts. You're serfs in Canada. Now, the time for building out our military resources was 10 or 15 years ago. Under the Stephen Harper government, they opened the door to China coming in and buying up our mineral industries, buying up our oil. They opened the door. Maxime Bernier, as Stephen Harper's right-hand man, wanted to go further. In 2017, when he ran for the leadership and even into the PPC era, he said that the biggest sin of Justin Trudeau was that he wasn't kicking the door wide open. He was a huge advocate for a free trade agreement with the Communist Party of China. They would have bought us completely out. It's bad enough that you can't afford to live in a house right now because of corrupt Chinese criminal money. And that's exactly what it is. We should have been building pipelines to get to port, to get to Tidewater. But we didn't do that. And any talk about building those pipelines now, I talked about in yesterday's video, Champagne saying that it was things have changed and we may need to build it. They still won't even commit to it. Quebec has come out and said, you're not building pipelines on our territory. How are we ever going to get to Tidewater? And even if we decide to start building the pipelines and the projects today, which would strengthen the fabric of Canada, we are years and years and years away from materializing that, from actually realizing any gain from it. We are years away from, like, who are we going to man this military base with? Where are we going to get the money? How much money have we sent to Ukraine, but we can't even buy our own guys and girls bullets in our military? This is too late. And Trump recognizes that it's too late. Canada is so far gone, folks, and you need to wake up to that reality. You need to go to your cities and you need to look around at all the addicts and the homeless people everywhere. You need to understand, from my previous videos, how big government is as a share of our GDP. And right below them, or maybe alongside them, or maybe even ahead of them, is criminal enterprise. Like somewhere between 40 and 50% directly of our GDP is derived from government, spending, and criminal enterprise. And who is telling you about this stuff? I've put the receipts out there. I've put the meat on the bones for you to see. Canada's in a bad way. The Americans know. They don't trust our police forces. They don't share intelligence about the scale of the cartel control of Canada, but also communist control. Do you think the NSA, the CIA, and all these other departments of the United States don't know how bad the situation is here in Canada? So underneath Trump's words, you need to read the executive orders. You need to understand that when he is talking about declaring cartels criminal organizations and terrorist organizations, he's talking about us too. We're on a short leash. We're not going to get out of this easy. So we might want to start thinking about either having a deal with the United States or completely renegotiating the way the Federation works. As much as I'd like to see Pierre as Prime Minister and handling this, I'd like to see him handle the immigration file. I'd like to see him handle this drug issue. I'm not sure Canada can bring it back at this point because everybody has been advocating for a weakening Canada for decades, and we're now reaping what we've sown. This is the CBC News front page at this hour, and I want to make sure you understand that I think that what they're covering here is an important issue. But are they telling you about the fact that Canada is defenseless? Are they telling you about the fact that we are overrun? Are they telling you about the fact that Trudeau has made commitments to Trump to waylay those tariffs that he can't possibly come good on? No, they're talking about after relationship turned sour, her nude photo, name and number were posted on sex work site. This is important stuff. I don't want to say that it's not, but if they're not writing articles, this is something to note. Over there, the Popular Now column right here, if an article doesn't get written, it doesn't appear on Popular Now. If an article doesn't get written and placed on the front page, it has no chance to get read. This is the subtle propaganda, the elimination of it. The whole front page is dedicated to stories surrounding this subject. Now, I would note that as much as I see CBC doing this stuff all the time, they never tell you about the fact that the making and distribution of child pornography has increased by a whopping 80.2% in 2023. It's only increased since then. So while you have roughly 10,000 cases of that, non-consensual distribution of intimate images incidents have increased by 472 cases. There's about 2,000 cases. The thing that they're focusing on right now in the midst of a national crisis is a small sliver of the aberrant crime that's actually happened when it comes to sex crimes. They never tell you about the disappearing children in this country. They never tell you about child exploitation. And there's a reason for that, because telling you about it will fundamentally undermine the progressive ideology, because it targets certain areas of the bureaucracy, it targets certain areas of the progressive agenda, it targets certain areas of the DEI initiatives, the gender unicorn, which they will not touch. So they're perfectly willing to cover up the story about the exploitation of children if it supports their chosen politics. But as relates to the issues we're talking about, they're not talking about how Canada's defenseless. They're not talking about how we're overrun by drug crime. They're not talking about something very specific that Trudeau promised Trump. This from Daniel Smith. Where is Canada's fentanyl czar? Where's the action that Trump was talking about in his clips that he says he's got? He hasn't got any action yet. We haven't named a fentanyl czar. We haven't done anything. We haven't moved personnel. We've done a bunch of public relations. But we are incapable of solving this problem on our own, and the Americans know it. This is a slow roll of the truth, in my opinion. It is nowhere on the CTV front page talking about how Trudeau is inevitably going to break his word. You go over to the Toronto Star, same thing. No talk about the fact that Trudeau has not kept his word. Go to the Vancouver Sun. Same thing. You might find some anti-Trump propaganda, but you're not going to find anything substantive. Global News, talking about those steel and aluminum tariffs, but they're not talking about Trudeau and the commitments he made and how he is bound to fail on all of them. This is our alternative media, the Post-Millennial. Same story. Where is the coverage about the Trudeau commitments that were made that would halt those tariffs, that reprieve, that 30-day reprieve, which we're ticking down to? We don't have long left. Where's the progress? So in 30 days, we're going to be in the same position. Going back to the issue that I opened with, you will never see the CBC or any other mainstream media outlet in this country do a flashy front page news cycle dedicated to the rise of child exploitation. In fact, the mainstream media promotes the vehicles by which predators can engage in their predation. So whenever you see a story celebrating Drag Queen Story Hour, whenever you see a story celebrating transgender daycare workers, know that even though it won't be every single one, that is a vehicle, that is an opportunity to fly in plain sight. Because that's what predators do. They don't operate in the dark and in the shadows. Anybody that's known anybody that was abused as a child, they are exhibitionists. They operate in plain sight. They operate under the cover and right under the noses of parents. You have to be very shrewd when it comes to protecting your kids because they're everywhere. This is an article, admittedly from CBC, but buried in the archives, that new data shows increase in reports of sexual abuse in schools. Covers the period 2017 to 2021. It came out in 2022. 252 current and former school personnel working in Canadian elementary and high schools committed or were accused of committing offenses of a sexual nature against a minimum of 548 children. Now, keep in mind the statistics that I showed you, that we've had an 80% increase in 2023. We don't know what happened in 2024 of instances just of child pornography. It's going up, and it's going up for a variety of reasons that we can get into. But nobody's telling you that story the way they should. Nobody wants to protect kids because it undermines DEI. It undermines the rainbow agenda because under those banners, these guys hide. It's not everybody that's under those banners, but they're able to hide in plain sight. Tolerating children attending a sex show is what is being promoted. I talked about during the recent Saskatchewan election how even NDP MLAs in conservative Saskatchewan, it's hard to maintain composure when talking about this stuff. It really cuts me. It really bothers me. I've always been an advocate for capital punishment when it comes to these kinds of people. If you will exploit a children, if you see a child as a sexual object, there should be no tolerance for that. Zero tolerance. We should be intolerant. We should discriminate against those people. You've got people writing articles about how the P should be added to the LGBT because it's just another orientation and they need to be understood too. Nope. We need a legal process that gets rid of them. The taxpayer shouldn't be on the hook to keep them in a facility, and no child should have to face the threat of being exploited. Parents have to be way too vigilant in this country. And we have the sentencing. A lot of these people never do jail time. They get probation, they get easy sentencing, they get house arrest, and then they just go and they reoffend because they can't stop themselves. There's only chemical castration and capital punishment are really the only solutions. But I digress. This is the number from years ago. If you understand that only about 6% of sexual assaults are reported and only 13% result in a conviction, you come up with a ratio that for every one conviction of sex crimes against children, there could be an estimated 1,280 to 12,800 unreported or unfound crimes. That's the math I came up with because in doing the research for this segment, I came up with a ton of articles that I could read you about just sex crimes coming out of education, public education. They'll tell you about residential schools all day. They'll tell you about things that happened in the past. They'll tell you about allegations coming out of the church, but they won't tell you of the much bigger contributor to the exploitation of children through daycares, through public schools. They'll do a splashy front page about a subject that is important, but is a sliver of the overall sex crimes, the lion's share of which are committed against children, and they won't do a front page about that. It is not just the important things when it comes to the United States and understanding our narco state, or understanding the scale of money laundering, or understanding the position that Canada's in and that our politicians have put us in. It's not just that. They're failing in their duty to tell you about how dangerous it is to be a child in this country, and it's only getting more dangerous as we move into the future. In related news, Trudeau is in France hobnobbing with Emmanuel Macron, who is married to this person who met Macron when he was 14 years old. There's a fascinating documentary series that's come out on YouTube called Becoming Bridget. It's about Emmanuel Macron's wife. Now, keep in mind the Olympic opening ceremony and the absolute horror show that was. Keep in mind that there were children present while that horror show was going on. You might start to gain insight as to why your political class in Canada and in Europe, as well as the media itself, doesn't want to tell you how dangerous it is to be a child in the world today. From the time that they are very young, elementary school, even here in my beloved Saskatchewan, down in Regina, where the center of evil actually is in this province, bringing in drag queens, bringing in so-called pregnant men to parade around in front of your elementary school children, teaching them about all kinds of sexual deviance. Do you understand why? It's a pattern. And to understand the world, you need to do pattern recognition, because your TV ain't going to tell you. Mainstream news websites aren't going to tell you what the pattern actually spells out. People like myself try, but are oftentimes labeled and dismissed. But the evidence of your eyes is everywhere. The victims are everywhere. This is another thing that the Americans are keen to end. The human trafficking angle, the human exploitation angle. It cuts deep into the things that I've just talked about. And I think if you love your children and you love the future and you love the family, you need to start paying attention. Open your eyes. It's not just the drug dens. It's not just the drugged out junkies on the street, the fence zombies, and the meth heads. There's so many layers to the onion in terms of the concerted effort to undermine Western civilization and to undermine the very structure of decency and morality. Ethics won't do us any good. We need morals. I'm Frank Vaughn. If you like the work, please consider supporting it via the website. I'll see you in the next one. Did you know that I have a website, frankvaughn.ca, the ultimate repository for all of my work, and a backup location just in case the censors come for me again. And if you like the content, please consider using the donate link in one of the options available. There are no paywalls, there is no advertising, and there is no Patreon, and I intend to keep it that way. Thank you for your time and your consideration.